Okay, can I welcome witnesses and the public to the 11th meeting of the Welfare Reform Committee, and can I remind everyone to please switch off all mobile phones and other electronic devices. Our first agenda item would be a declaration of interest, but the member who has to do that is not with us yet, so we'll go to agenda item 2 and skip back to 1 when she arrives. The purpose of agenda item 2 is to invite the committee to agree to take certain items in relation to the Welfare Reform Further Provision Scotland Bill in private later in the meeting. Specifically, the committee is invited to agree that consideration of agenda items 5, 6 and 7 are taken in private. These agenda items will focus on invitations to possible future witnesses, topics for a future chamber debate and consideration of the Scottish Government's draft budget 2013-14. Members agree to take these in private? Okay, we then come to agenda item 3, and this is an evidence-taking session with members of the public who got in contact with the committee through the web page, which was set up to help hear concerns of people affected by welfare reforms and changes to benefits. All 3 testimonies, which we will hear in a moment, give a good snapshot of some of the issues from the many other submissions we have received through this initiative. I'd like to take a second before we hear from our witnesses to thank all of the other people who took time to send in their submissions to the committee. They were very valuable, and we hope that that will continue, because the more information we have, the better. Now, I propose that we have each of our witnesses read their statements out, and then we can bring in the committee members to ask some follow-up questions so that we, on the issues that we've heard. Can I point out, in the case of Mr Henry Sherlock, that Steve Farrell, one of the Parliament's committee clerks, will be reading out a submission on Mr Sherlock's behalf. So can I formally welcome Mr Norman Gray, Mrs Janice Scott and Mr Henry Sherlock, and thank you all for being here today. Before we go to that, to allow Linda to take part, thanks for coming along, Linda, this morning. I know you're here to substitute, but I have to ask you to declare any interest that might be relevant to the committee's work.
First of all, can I apologise for my late arrival, and can I say my only interest would be as a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Housing.
Okay, thanks very much, Linda, and welcome to the committee. Okay, we come then to our evidence. I think we'll take it in order of Mr Gray, then Mrs Scott, and then Mr Sherlock, if that's agreeable to everyone, and I'll just open the floor up to you then, Mr Gray. Thanks very much.
Okay. Before I give my submission, I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to express our fears over the changes from DLA to PIP. Although much mitigated after speaking with my own MSP, Joe Fitzpatrick, and the clerk to the committee when she visited, both expressed the same kind of concerns we have, as does the report when you look at them on the website. Although my submission refers to Andrew in particular, he's not unique in the world of the autistic spectrum and reflects a situation which will face a large number of people, of sufferers like Andrew, to some extent in the near future. Many are unaware, or most are unaware, of the changes, and certainly can't see the consequences of these changes that have been proposed. So I find this opportunity very rewarding. I wish to bring your attention to concerns over the proposal to replace DLA with PIP, and the criteria used to assess candidates and some of the effects of it. My son Andrew is aged 32 and was only diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was aged 19, although he'd been under intermittent psychiatric psychological care since the age of 3. After diagnosis as suffering from Asperger's syndrome, he was assessed and granted DLA indefinitely. To him, indefinitely means for life. Since then, he has had occasional reassessment. Andrew's developmental disability stems from the genesis of the corpus callosum, which means then that his left and right side of the brains don't speak to each other as normal people's do. And that this is a lifelong situation which will never change. So Andrew finds it very difficult to understand why things are happening, because he was told it's lifelong and your condition's this way. Research tests conducted by the Autism Research Centre in Cambridge have shown that Andrew has a very high score, 33 out of 50 for autistic traits, a very low score, 70 out of 80 for empathising, and a low score of 22 out of 160 for systematising. While it does not give the impression of having an ASD-related disability, these scores indicate the true level of a disability, which over time, with hard work by himself and us, he has been able to minimise or mask. However, some traits he seems unable to modify. The more serious is his appreciation of the concept of building time into a sequence of actions. Because of this, he finds it difficult to do things by the required time. Andy benefited from the modular nature of his educational courses and was able to achieve an HNC in hospitality management and got employment at a nearby hotel, the Invercarse Hotel, as a function waiter. When Andy was diagnosed, the hotel was briefed by the psychologist over how to manage him, and the overall manager and the senior manager became his mentors. And that's for the last 12, 14 years, they've actually mentored him through his work there. As a result, the hotel management have cooperated well in ensuring his foibles are minimised and his strengths developed. Andy can disappear off. If you give him an instruction to do 3 things, he does the last one, forgets the other 2, and then disappears in his own little world somewhere for a while till he's brought back again. And they understand that and deal with him very effectively. He's been able to be in continuous employment with them for over 12 years, but on this part-time basis. And again, it's just really through the good work of the hotel that he's managed 12 years in the one establishment. He's doing work which has a degree of routine and familiarity to it, and which he knows he's competent to do. He's not continuous throughout the day, but involves split shifts, allowing him to come down between shifts. He'll maybe do a set-up in the morning and then have the afternoon off and back in at night for the service part of it. And therefore he gets his time on the computer to come down and go back to work refreshed again. His work takes on just about under 20 hours a week, thus qualifying for him for tax credits. And both his mentors have stated, when I went to speak to him about increasing his hours, that Andrew's excellent up to 5 hours. He'll do his work no problem. After that, it's hit or miss. Some days he carries on, other days his missing time or fiddling becomes more and more. And they have learned how to manage him and what to do with him. Sometimes they cut short his work and send him home. We are both approaching, my wife and I are both approaching 70, and I felt it was essential that Andrew had a period of independent living under our guidance. So because of that, we worked with him to gain a flat nearby. Initially, he applied for sheltered housing and he applied for council housing. In the sheltered housing, he was top of the disability list for 6 months. In council housing, he went from 100th to 150th in the 6-month period. So we were able to contribute to a mortgage, and he then got this flat nearby, which is his house. He lives independently, but saying that, he needs company. So he comes to us for meals, stays on, and we throw him out at 10:30, sometimes literally throw him out 10:30. But it's not because he can't live independently, it is simply he needs the company. And it's like from today, there's nobody at the house today. When I go back home tonight, I'll get 5 hours of ear bashing as he tells me what he's done during the day, who he's served, and all the rest of it. So the determining factor of his mortgage was his securing accommodation, was a DLA on an indefinite basis. This is the factor they said, because he's got that, he can get a mortgage. We have obviously underwrote that side as well, but the DLA was an important thing. His wage and tax credit gives him sufficient income to live on. And again, if you look at the record today, you'll see it. It's about £250 is his weekly income. And he spends that, and mostly all of that's spent on his house and his own activities in the area. And he's met a girl who also has learning difficulties. Hers are totally different from his, and they are actually they've been engaged, and they're now beginning to settle down, looking for living together in the house. But his engagement, his courting time lasted six years. So how long his engagement lasts, who knows at the end of it. So any significant changes in these arrangements would have a major effect on Andrew. He would really go right off and become very difficult again. And I went onto the website, read the proposals for the advice criteria for PIP, and these brought about major concerns. And I was quite surprised when I went on that these were there, and I hadn't been aware of what's happening really, till I often do, I went on the site to look at things that concerned him. First bit about the criteria, that they talked of issues of, at 7.4 in the criteria, talks of issues of reliability. In Andrew's case, that doesn't work, because for 8 to 9 times out of 10, he's perfectly all right, can manage things. The 10th time, you might as well just forget it, because he won't do it. or he forgets things and becomes difficult in that respect. So it's something triggers an overload, and he then can't manage that part of it. So you can't say he can do it for 70% of the time. He's quite adequate. It doesn't work that way with him and others like him. When he can't manage it, he again gets additional stress, and he then becomes more awkward and more difficult, and he then becomes really fraught. We just send him off, onto the computer, onto the Wii, go upstairs, something to give him peace to come down again. 7.5 talks about the issue of safety. And Andrew, yes, he's quite safe in terms of crossing roads, but again, there's no guarantee that he can do it. If, for example, he's going to cross the road, he'll stand at the side till he thinks that it's safe enough. He'll start to cross, but if something comes, he'll suddenly stop again, go back, and then start going forward again. So he's got a kind of way that he can't judge distance, time, and consequences and be definite in his action. So any driver would have a nightmare trying to decide what he's trying to do if they saw him in the middle of the road. The issue of support levels is another factor that Andrew doesn't really require support as envisaged in terms of carer or that kind of support. His support is much more one of a mental support, a constant reassurance. If he asked a question of Alex, for example, and Annabelle, you answered it for him, he would say yes and then ask Alex the question again. He's got to get the answer back from that same person as he verbalises what's happening in his own mind. He finds it difficult to make any decisions independently, and if you ask him for a choice between three things, he'll just stay stuck, then say, what do you think? And if you tell him that, he'll say, but what about? And ask him another alternative. So support isn't financial care support, much more a mental well-being support. So in terms of the assessment criteria, when you go through that, Andrew might score 3 or 4 points, which obviously would not give him a chance of getting any PIP in the area. For example, when you look again at the criteria, they don't measure up to what he can do. He can cook and prepare a meal, but he chooses not to, as I said earlier. He's fully aware of healthy eating, but his problem is when does he stop? It's always, I'll have another one. This is my last one, as he takes 2 or 3 at one time, and that kind of thing. There's always, in activity 3, he can manage medication. He's fine with his any tablets he takes, but he's got a very low, very high pain threshold. He can't tolerate touch, but he's got a very high pain threshold. So anytime he's ill, for example, if he gets an abscess, that becomes very inflamed, overreactive before he actually will say, I've got this sore bit. So that kind of thing deteriorates against him. The last one he had, he said, can I get a paracetamol? And we said, what for? And he says, oh, I've got this bit, it's sore. And I said, but that won't cure your sore bit, but paracetamol takes away the pain. So to him, taking away the pain took away the cause and the symptoms behind it. So that kind of thing would be very difficult for him to manage any medical side in terms of reacting to his own body side. In washing, he goes over the score that shower gel is more than one a week, and deodorant is even worse. It's very similar to the gentleman on the TV programme who deodorised himself all over when he's going out for his date. Andrew does the same. You can smell him downstairs when he's upstairs as he's going out. So these kind of things are hidden factors that come into play with his problem. In communication, he's at risk because you cannot read people. I can sit here and look at Annabelle and see her eyes and see her face and say, you're listening, you're interested, you're laughing at points. To him, he either got a funny face or a neutral face or occasionally a very sad face. But he can't read anything in between. If you frown at him, he doesn't know what it means. We're at a function and we kick him under the table. We'll frown at him and then kick him under the table. He'll then say, why are you kicking me? Because of that, he cannot read a face, and therefore he's very vulnerable in streetwise terms. Walking along in town, sometimes they say, look, you see these drug people here, you don't look at them. But he then says, where? And looks down directly at them. So these kind of things make him vulnerable in that respect. In financial matters, again, he handles money quite happily. There's no problem in paying for things, getting change, checking that out, running a bank account. But he can't shop sensibly. If he goes into Tesco's and sees an offer of 3 for 2, he'll buy the 3 for 2, he's only needing 1, and he'll never use the other 2 for a long, long time. But to him, that's a bargain. So he's very extravagant in these kind of shopping aspects. You cannot cope with household bills. I get them all the time to come down because you cannot handle them. You cannot think of the bills, of how to manage a bill in that respect. And all these general bills are all being put on direct debit by me, so that he's quite safe. He doesn't have to remember to pay off things. For safety reasons, often he'll take a taxi rather than take a walk into town, for example. Because of this, his bus pass is very valuable to him, because that is his saviour. He walks. He won't drive. He refuses to even think of learning to drive because he says, I wouldn't be safe. He knows he wouldn't be safe. He would just panic and be a danger to himself and to other road users. The assessment also indicates that the one-to-one interviews is a safeguard. In Andrew's case, it wouldn't really work because he can't see the whole picture. If you ask him a question, he'll bore you to tears by answering one small part of that question. And if you interrupt him, he comes back to where he left off, almost like a computer pressing the button for the next stage. He'll also think, what are you wanting me to say? So he'll try and work out what you want him to say and say what he wants you to say. And he's not really based on reality. To him, it's either that or that. And it's what he sometimes thinks in his own mind is what's happening, and it's far removed from reality. He makes up a lot of stuff just to make it sound good. If you say something, he'll then think, well, that's what people say. So he'll repeat that in the conversation as if it's true, but far from it. So I hope from this that I've shown that Andrew's 2 assessment needs aren't being met by the descriptors used in PIP. That really his developmental need is very different from the kind of cases envisaged in the PIP situation. And assessment criteria really are false in terms of people like Andrew who've got Asperger's syndrome and other ASD factors. The consequences of him losing his PIP, I think, are more, for me, much more worrying. That if he did that, failed his assessment, he would obviously fail to get a equivalent of DLA, which is a great passport for him for essential living. That he gets a normal life through having universal credit. He gets his tax credits. He gets his council tax exemption, his bus pass, dental care and medical care. That is very much a big saving to him, but it's a big lifeline to him equally. As I stated earlier, he can live in his wage and tax credit at present, but without these, he'd be faced with changing his pattern of employment to where he would have to become eligible for universal credit and basically live off benefit. He can't meet an actual working wage from working full-time. This would be soul destroying for him, and you'd feel total failure. I said you'd have to do about 40 hours. You could manage maybe 30 to push in a week, but no more. So the outcome of that would, he might have to leave his current employment situation. They've said yes, to push him up as far as they can, but certainly not anywhere near full-time. And the trauma of leaving this job that he loves, that Dundee know him by. I mean, he first name turned with the provost a lot, and everybody knows me. Go downtown, and it's, hi Andy, hi Chiefy, and all the rest. I'm Andrew's dad. I'm not me, I'm Andrew's dad. So he's so well known, and he enjoys that kind of knowledge that he gets from it. So he'd have to leave, but the problem is finding another employer who's aware of the situation is near enough for him to walk to. He's only about a minute, 2 minutes away from the hotel where he stays. Who'd be able to monitor him quite successfully and take him through his problems. That would be virtually impossible. So that's a big problem. He'd also have difficulty in sustaining his house, because if he lost his DLA, I don't know how the mortgage company would react. Whether they would say, yes, you can carry on as that at present, or whether they'd recall the factors. And the worst scenario we can envisage is that we'd have to give up his house in the end and come back to living with us. But that defeats the purpose of independent living a normal life. What happens to his girlfriend and their ideas and their plans for marriage, I don't know. So I'm quite sure within myself that one of the consequences would be that he would need much more input from social work from psychological psychiatric services, and would, in the long run, be a bigger expense than he is at present to the state. So my conclusion is that while I'm quite favouring rationalising the benefit system, I think anybody in their own tiny thinking person would say yes, there's a lot of misuse of the benefit system going on. It needs to be rationalised. And I agree with closing as many loopholes as possible. But I think the proposals to change DLA to PIP are too rigid, don't take into account the needs of individual, rather it's a blanket effect, and the individual is much more important. And certainly in our case, it doesn't recognise the complexity of Asperger's and the other ASD sufferers. Each one is unique. There's no one that could say they are all the same in terms of Asperger's. So the regulations criteria don't recognise this uniqueness in their suffering and the uniqueness in their needs. Andrew makes a very strong contribution to society in several fields to the limit of his capabilities. The proposals, I think, would make a short-term saving for a long-term additional cost. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mrs. Scott for your contribution. We'll go through all of the witnesses before we go to the committee.
Okay. Some months ago I read in the Daily Record newspaper about the cross-party working group and that you wanted to hear from individuals about the benefit cuts and how they are affected by them. I set out below my husband's circumstances in respect of the changes to in employment and support allowance. My husband worked all his life from 15 years old in various jobs and was medically retired in 2010 by the City of Edinburgh Council Occupational Health, having spent 25 years working there. This was due to him having had an accident on his scooter, had an operation to fix a plate to his leg and ankle. Then, just after the operation, he took a massive stroke. This left him with long-term health problems, and since he is now 62, there is not much chance of his health improving. In fact, in the last year, I've seen a deterioration. My husband applied for and received ESA, the first time in his life he's ever had any benefits, after a horrific medical, which I won't go into here, with ATOS, but it was totally inadequate, and they certainly did not take into account medical information given from stroke consultants, doctors, or indeed occupational health itself, which approved my husband's early medical retirement from work. He was placed in the limited capacity for working group. His benefit continued from that time, but from April this year, people who were paying ESA under the contribution rate, which my husband was, meant that after a year the benefits came to an end. My husband no longer qualifies for ESA because his year has come to an end. At that particular time, I was working more than 24 hours a week, and that completely disqualified him from employment support allowance because of the group that he was in. It was so difficult to actually get put into the support group. That's the group that doesn't stop your benefit, but you literally have to be within 6 months of death practically before you can get into that group. And I can't fathom at all why they're taking benefits away from people who have paid the contribution rate for years. This means that people, including my husband, have paid into the system for years, in my husband's case over 45 years, only get benefits for 1 year. So for the next 3 years, from 62 to 65, until my husband gets his state pension, I'm having to keep him and pay his share of the household expenses, which is difficult for me to do on what I earn. He does get DLA, my husband, which is helpful because that helps to pay for the car. But I haven't actually touched on that here. What's going to happen when it changes to PIP? I just dread to think what's going to happen at that particular time. So basically, all the benefits my husband does get at the moment is the DLA. He no longer gets employment and support allowance simply because he paid it by contribution rate and it stopped. I can't understand why people who are getting ESA, apart from the support group, that don't pay contribution rate, they get it on their income. They've never worked a day in their lives, a lot of them. They've never contributed anything towards national insurance. Neither will a lot of their partners, yet their income won't change. They've never paid a penny into the system, not like my husband has for 40 odd years, and they continue to get employment support allowance because it's not done on contribution rate. It's done on their actual income. But it's the people that have paid into the system that this is hurting. You know, they've paid contributions, they've maybe got a partner who works, and I just feel the whole situation is totally unfair. Since this new law started, about the 1 year on the people who pay the contribution rate to ESA, it's affected hundreds and thousands of people who have had a massive change in their circumstances. And this, I understand, may possibly lead in the future to people lying about whether they have a partner or not, or whether they work 24 hours or not, and lying about their circumstances just so they can get some income, which is wrong, I know, but some people may be desperate. On calculating our income, we're actually £400 a month worse off since my husband's employment support allowance has stopped. Most of the income he gets from the DLA pays from the car and gives him a little money to himself, but he feels now that he can no longer contribute as much towards the household. This is really, it's affected him badly, and he just feels so bad because there's absolutely nothing he can do about it. You know, he can't understand the fact that he's worked all his life, and now, you know, near his retirement, through no fault of his own, because he's needing something like this, he's no longer getting it. And he can't seem to get his head around that at all. And it really is very hurtful to him, since he's contributed constantly in our married life. You know, he's always contributed to the household and everything. He's no longer able to do that the way he did before, and it's quite hurtful for him to see me having to do the contribution. There's a lot in this system I feel has not been totally thought through, especially, you know, for people that have worked 40, 45 years, and suddenly if they get ill, they're only allowed to claim benefits for a year. That, to me, is just, there's something not right about that at all. If you've paid that amount of contributions, they should have brought something in that should have covered for your payments to continue. I'm just, you know, I'm just appalled at the way that it's happened. And when I first sent the submission in, I wasn't aware of all what was happening with DLA and PIP. I now am, because I've read more into it and heard more about it, and I've got no doubts at all that this is just going to go exactly the same way, and people like my husband are going to be left with next to no income. It's going to affect all their other things, like their blue badge, affect myself, like carers allowance and everything, and it's just frightening. So if there's anything at all this committee can do to help people like myself, I'm sure we'd all be more than grateful, and thanks for listening to me.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mrs. Scott. Steve, you're going to read Mr. Sherlock's statement for us. Thanks very much.
Inclusion Scotland have provided me with details of the recent meeting held with Bill Scott, who was giving evidence to the Welfare Reform Committee about how many disabled people in Scotland on different disability benefits will lose all or part of these benefits, and how many will be further affected by the housing benefit reform. I have been asked as part of this process to provide information regarding my own experiences of these reforms and how they have affected my life. I am a 50-year-old man who is registered blind and a guide dog user. I have chronic heart disease, diabetes, and suffer from depression. I lost my sight at the age of 31, and as I worked for a government department, I was kept in employment due to their equal opportunities policies. However, when I had my heart attack 7 years ago, I was finished by the department on health grounds. I received DLA mobility and care component and have been migrated from incapacity benefit to ESA support group. During my migration to ESA, I was continually harassed by ATOS Healthcare, Job Centre Plus and DWP, all of which I complained about. The processes they used and the protocols were not followed, resulting in me feeling harassed and bullied. I did not receive the communications in my chosen format and only got them when I complained. I was forced to go to a medical centre in an area unknown to me, even though the protocol stated blind and deaf-blind people have the right to undergo a medical assessment at home. Those complaints were upheld and I received an official apology. This was a traumatic time for me and it left me scared about my future. ESA is a time-limiting benefit, even to those of us who are put in the support group. In reality, this is how the benefit has been set up. The work group are limited to 12 months in ESA, and the support group can undergo further medical assessments at any time. I was initially put in the support group for a period of approximately 8 months. When I queried this, I was told they had made a mistake, and the longest anyone can be put in the support group for is 3 years. After this, I will undergo another reassessment. However, depending on future ESA rulings or medical examiner guidance, this could leave me being transferred to the work group sooner, resulting in ESA being removed within a 12-month period. This seems strange to me, as my disability will never change. Yet according to the current rules, a medical assessment can be called at any time to see whether I am still considered disabled enough to stay in the support group. As far as I'm concerned, this is harassment, bullying, persecution and victimisation of the most vulnerable in our society. Prior to the introduction of ESA, there were exemptions to the medical assessment process. Now there are none. This means everyone has to undergo these medical assessments, even though common sense indicates no requirement. This is a waste of public spending, yet this is ignored. It is hard enough for able-bodied people to secure work during this recession, but it's so much harder for anyone with a disability. The government appears to forget that, and as a result, many disabled people will lose their benefit and have to depend on others for survival. I will soon be one of them. At this time, my benefit does not cover all my costs. I have to rely on friends and family for sensory, physical and financial support. I thought I was one of the lucky ones who saved hard when I could work and bought my own home. Now I am no longer fit to work. My benefits do not meet my needs. Unlike people in social housing, I have to pay for my repairs. I have to pay for my gardening. I have to pay for my building insurance and a whole lot more. Is there support for people who have their own home? No. I thought the days of the blind man begging with a cup on street corners were gone. Sadly, that is not the case. I still rely on family handouts and additional begged support in order to live. ESA, and as far as I'm aware, PIP, and its introduction will never meet the true cost of disability. If disabled people were provided by the actual help they need, the true cost to the Treasury and the local authority would be so much higher than the current benefits on offer. I fear for the introduction of the PIP, which evidently means personal independence payment. However, none of the consultation papers show the application to be personal or based on independence. Once again, the questions and the weightings are all in favour of removing support rather than providing financial support. This is backed up by the fact that the main objective of this benefit is to reduce the welfare bill by at least 20%. I fear that I will have to go through another witch hunt in order to apply for this benefit. I originally applied for DLA due to my disability, then was awarded DLA for life. Then the wording suddenly changed on communications, stating indefinitely. Now, not only do they make the criteria harder, they remove some of the ranges. The middle rate care component has been removed, and now we only have a high and a low rate. Why? 2 rates show no room for flexibility and are certainly not conducive to being personal. I fear, without a doubt, I will only lose more income once I have to go through this undignified process once again. I am tired of fighting officials who seem to think that they know more about my disabilities and needs than I do. It now makes me feel ashamed of who I am. I am being punished for being disabled and I feel powerless. Being blind is an isolating disability. If my benefits are slashed in any way, I will become even more isolated. I would not be able to afford to use my computer. This is the only true way of providing me with information and communication. I would not be able to afford the internet, which will cut me off from family and friends. I would not be able to afford the additional high cost of assistive technology I use, which will leave me in danger. I will not be able to afford the support I need for shopping, gardening, socialising, banking, reading mail, getting to places like hospital, dentists, barbers, etc. Many benefits have passported support, such as the National Entitlement Card, which acts as free access to buses and trains. As a blind person, I was proud of the Scottish Government for recognising the fact that blind people require a companion in order to get about and participate in society. However, if this changes with the new rulings, I could find myself without this support. Without this card, I would become bound to the area I live in, which will in turn lose my rights to a social life, family life, health and daily living activities. The entitlement card is awarded based on the benefits you receive, and one of them includes DLA. Changing to PIP could have a dreadful impact on people's mobility, jobs, involvement, health and social aspects. I only wish the government would look closely at people's disabilities, look really closely at people's disabilities and see the true disabling factors. Disabled people are still fighting for equality to jobs, access to the built-up environment, access to information, access to social lives, access to housing. The barriers are still there, and with this recession, no money is being spent to remove these barriers. How are the disabled ever going to get equality? As a blind man, my medical assessment declares I am mobile because I have a mobility aid, my guide dog. I am mobile, but not fully independently mobile. I am only mobile in areas I have knowledge of. I am only mobile if I remember my route. I am not mobile if crossings don't work, or during bad weather in wind and snow, or in areas I have never been to, or if my guide dog is out of commission. The questions and waiting should not be put in such a way which favours an outcome of removal of support. The question should surely be in favour of positive outcome for the customer or claimant. This needs to be examined under our human rights and the UK's Equality Act 2010. I am a proud man and would love to work for a living. However, the true facts are employers do not want to employ disabled people. There are no real incentives for employers to employ disabled people. There is no strategy in place to help disabled people get jobs and retain them. Even when I was in employment with an equal opportunities employer, I did not have all my needs met. Communications were always in print format, meetings were held and my needs ignored. Although most understood I used a screen reader, which is a slower process to listen to it, as there is no facility to speed read, I was still expected to meet the same targets as someone who could see. I had to work harder and longer just to keep myself in work, and as a result I ended up with a heart attack due to the pressures. Not just doing the job, but travelling to the job, travelling within the job, coping with my disability and organising workloads. When you are the only one who is blind in the workforce, you are even more isolated. There is no one who understands your needs or the support you require. I loved my job. However, I did not love the isolation, fear, bullying and hardship it brought. It truly is a sad reflection of any government that refuses to see the true fear it has put the most vulnerable in our society under. In my opinion, it is simply persecution. We did not choose our disabilities. We need support to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society is not the hardest hit. Many of our disabled people are having their income slashed from anything between 20 to 100%. It would be good to see the Scottish Government take positive, proactive steps to help protect its people from this persecution. It would be a significant step forward to see the Scottish Government involve disabled people in any process which will affect their lives. I hope this has given you some insight into the fears that I have for my future. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm sure there are many stories out there from people similar or indeed worse off than myself.
Thanks very much, Steve.